Welcome to Makers of Four, Master of None, and welcome to 2025. And since it is January, you know what time it is on our channel. It is time for us to discuss what we did for Christmas last year in 2024. Now, this is a present for a dog groomer who has recently started a business. So I want to make something useful for her to keep all of her tools together while she's grooming the dogs, because puppies can be very energetic, they run everywhere, so it's easier to have all of her tools on her instead of being everywhere and scattered about. Also, it's useful to keep treats and stuff on her as well, so that it keeps the attention of the puppies when she's grooming them and not misplacing things as she's going along. So I'm not quite sure how to do this, so in here I'm sketching up two designs. One is more tool bag style, so it's more separates your left and right, there's not much in the center, and the second one is more aprony. As you can see here, there are spaces for a few scissors, some clippers, some combs, and just a few general pockets for things like phones, snacks, treats for the puppies, etc. And after consultation with not the person who's going to get the present, we decided that it was best for the second option, where it's more apron. So I only have 3 pieces of big leather, one being this one, which is veg tan, quite thick, about 3 to 4 mil. Doesn't really bend very well, and just scare the cat off. The last project this was used for was a Cambridge Natural, which was my first big leather project. That was quite fun. The other 2 are leftovers from the glove project. So that was the main color. I'm gonna have to trim the edge of this bit. So it looks something like this. A little bit short, but definitely more flexible. And the other option is the black, also from, there seems to be more black, and again this flexes a bit more, so that's quite good. So probably use this one just because it's a little bit bigger, and this determines our size for the project, and we'll get down to cutting once I find my meter rule. What are you doing there? And with that, we move over to the bench to start to do some rough layup and trying to figure out where things go. Now, because I don't know the exact size of the other person's tool, and to give it a bit more future-proof, I'm just going to use whatever I have and then size it up a little bit. So as you can see here, there's quite a few phallic shapes being cut out, but you saw how those got there, and they was definitely not intentional. To get a better idea of the rough layout, we are going to trim the big piece of leather into a shape which is closer to what we need, and then try and do some layout. So I'm currently laying out the stuff which I think is going to be needed. This is on the right hand side, which is right hand dominated, and you don't really want to have the scissors in the middle, because then you could accidentally stab yourself, and so you want them pulling to the side. Then underneath is going to be some clippers so all the cutting tools is going to be on one side. The shaver, you don't want to put that low because that's heavy and it swings about, and that's going to be annoying when you're working. You ideally want it on the same side as your cutting tools, so high here, so either you can have a horizontal pouch or you can have a vertical pouch for it. And then the tools, the other clippers and stuff can just be at the bottom. I haven't cut that out yet. This one can be double-sided because this, I'm not sure whether this is like a small scissors is needed, but if there is a small scissors, then they can in the front pouch, you can have that one. So there's going to be another pouch here. Onto the brushes, which comes in various shapes and forms. So I'm not sure quite what to do on this one. So I'm just going to have a think about, consult, and come back later. Once we're happy with that, then we start to make patterns for all of the pockets that we're going to need. For neat to look, I am using straight edges as well as rounded corners, so that it's easy to cut out the patterns as well. This is also my first time designing in gutters with my work, so that's going to be interesting how it turns out. Essentially, if I think it needs a little bit more depth, then I'm going to put a gusset in. So things like nail clippers, and obviously for clippers, then I'm going to add in a gusset. For things like scissors and a phone pocket, they probably don't need one. Once all of the pattern is cut, I stick them onto the leather using some masking tape. This is so that I know I have enough leather to finish the project, as well as being able to stamp out any holes I need for stitching. Now, because this is the first time me designing gussets, I didn't really put much thought into it, I just kind of did it. Some of the holes didn't really align later on in the sewing process, but I'll show you those when they come across. So once all of the holes are punched for their respective pieces, I just cut it out using a straight edge, and where possible use a corner punch so that the corners are even and uniform. Most of the pockets are in brown, which is a contrast color to the black apron, but I'm also making some of the scissors pockets in black as well, so that there's a color pattern in there. I'm also making the flaps of the pockets with gussets black as well, so that there's a bit more visual contrast when you look at it. And that process took a while. Once all of the pieces are ready, I use some leather cream to clean up the back, as well as some of the edges as well, and then I lay them up to dry. So I was just reviewing these. I've noticed that I've cut one of them, the other orientation, to what I think I want, which is this side. And also the other thing is the cream has taken off some of the top on here. It might not blemish out, so we might have to cut another piece, this one. And think about orientation as well. I did cut up more pieces, but it's going to be boring me showing you the exact same thing again. So here is me doing something that I've never done with leather before, using a sewing machine. Test piece that I was doing to make sure that I know what I'm doing before I ruin my piece. So I was playing around with some settings, which was why you see the piece moving forwards and backwards and the needle doing some funky stuff. To use a sewing machine though, you need a bobbin, which is what I'm rounding up now. Once you have a bobbin with the thread, then you put that at the bottom of the sewing machine, and then you loop the thread from the top into the bottom, and then you loop them up so that when you stitch something, it hooks together. So the reason why I'm using a sewing machine in here is because I wanted to do the hem. Now, if I was using a thicker piece of leather, I probably could get away with just finishing the edge nicely and beveling it. But because this is fairly thin leather and is going to be worked fairly hard, I want to hem it and fold it over itself so that it is a little bit more resistant to wear and tear. And I don't want to do that all by hand. It's going to be very tiring, and my wrists were at that point suffering from pain from all of the other things I was doing. So sewing machine was a good chance for me to experiment and see if I can speed up my workflow. To try and give myself as much of an even chance here, I'm using some masking tape to tape up the edge to the width that I want to use. Now, this is not perfect because the tape wasn't very grippy, but I can't use, for example, pins where I would use in normal fabric sewing because holes in leather stay. You can't really get rid of them. So once it's all taped up, I put it through the machine. And you can see how slowly I started initially with how hesitant I was. But once I got through the initial phase, just went through with it, and then it wasn't too bad. The main thing I did wrong here was that I forgot I had a walking foot, which would have helped immensely, but I did use that later on when I had to use a sewing machine again. There were spots that I missed that I have to go back and fix. and it's definitely not even all the way through, but it's fine for what it is, and I'm not going to point that out when I give it as a present. And then it came time to do the part that takes the longest, which is hand sewing all of the pockets onto the apron. So again, I started with laying out all of the pieces on the apron. I taped the top piece of the pocket onto the apron so that I know where it is, and then stamped out the holes for where the gusset is going to be connected to the apron, and then that is going to connect to the pocket. Ideally, that should all line up and work, but as it is with every project, nothing works the way that you think it is. Sometimes it's misaligned by a little bit because either the holes in the gusset isn't perfect or the holes in the pocket isn't perfect, so there's going to be a little bit of trial and error. I have a little bit of a problem, which is my flap is a little bit too close to this. So what I'm going to do is, because I already punched all the holes, so it's a bit too late now. So I'm just going to snip this carefully. So that should make it flat. And for the next ones, do the flap first, so it can be then hidden underneath the gusset. I'm not going to show you all of the sewing because that took a very long time, and you probably don't want to see all of that, because more or less it's just the same. Now, because I'm not too confident with the sewing machine and the pockets are right in the middle of the apron, it makes it very difficult for the sewing machine to get to where I need it to be. And also because they are gussets as well, there's lots of geometry that we need to play around with that I'm just not going to experiment with on this particular project. It was all going relatively well until I realized that two of the gussets that I cut wasn't long enough. So one of the mistakes I made was when I made the gusset for the two main pockets, is that it is nowhere near long enough. It's missing essentially one side length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out another piece, and then I'm going to splice that down the middle. Hopefully that works, I don't know yet, but we're going to have to do that regardless. Because I have no idea what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do a practice on the scrap piece. Zigzag. Nope, that's just going straight through the middle. Needle width all the way across. I feel like that should work, but maybe not that pattern. So that one alternates a little bit. I just want something stable. I don't need something fancy. I feel like that works. Although I'm not sure why it keeps increasing in distance. Playing around with a sewing machine with a project deadline that's coming up very soon. Is it just how fast I press? Maybe. I think that's good, so we're going to do that on our actual piece. And if it all goes to shits, well, it all goes to shits. There's nothing much I can do about that. I think that's probably fine. So let's do the other side as well. So the reason why I put that instead of putting it at the end, I put it in the middle and do all of this extra work twice, is because I don't really want this to be visible. I mean, as visible as it's going to be on YouTube. But other than that, no. There we go, that's a patch of 2. That should hopefully stay. And it should hide somewhere, so it should be okay. That's it, I guess, for this part. So I thought I didn't have a walking foot, but it turns out that I actually do. So I'm going to try and install this and, well, try it out, essentially. If you can't tell, I have no idea what I'm doing with a sewing machine, and I'm just trying things out. But I'm sure you know this already. Cool, so that's that. Let's try this, put this down. Oh, that is so much better. The plan for these ones is that I will sew one end of this onto here. Not all the way, but mostly about there-ish. And then I'll sew this bit onto this so that there's a pocket here. And then I will sew the next one. I'll find the brown one at some point here. So I'll sew all of these interconnecting bits first, which means I'll have 4 flappy things. And then I'll sew one line at a time and just having to do this edge. That's the first one. And now I need to find the second one, so the second brown one, which is probably hiding somewhere. And typical fashion, I'm losing my shit. I'm losing my shit. My shit everywhere.
Later that same evening.
On the floor. Right, now let's aim to do the same. And when we're sewing this, we need to be careful that we're not sewing these two bits together, so I need to do that. I'm just gonna quickly tape that up a little bit. Just before we get started. Whoops, I've moved it obviously. Now that I've got that, I don't need this anymore. So now I'm just gonna have holes randomly punched out, but hopefully that should hide somewhere. Off they go. So quick snip of these. I think I'm doing something wrong because it's just like falling apart. Is this just held on by hopes and dreams at this point? Maybe. Okay, so now that that's done, what we're going to do is try and sew this onto here, and we're going to focus on the first one first. I'm going to put that roughly around there for no particular reason. And we're just going to feed this through and secure the loop. And then we'll do just these sides as they kind of fold. What's the best way of doing this? As you can tell, it's getting a little bit cramped in here, so I have to roll up the rest of the apron while that's being worked on. And pray to the goddess of sewing, whoever that is. I don't know. That went a little bit too far. So I'm going to create a little bit of a bulge in here, like stitch, so it makes it a little bit easier for the scissors to go in. I don't know how that's going to go, so we'll find out as we go along. It's gonna be really hard to stay though, so put down. Okay, so I think that concludes at least this portion, the 4 pockets on here. So I'll see you guys at some point when I'm less tired and have dinner. So really, that was it for the exciting parts of the sewing process. The rest that was left was just to finish off the big 2 pockets, which the length was a little bit off because it was just extended with a random amount. Luckily it was enough, but we just have to trim a little bit of it off at the end. Now it does mean that the 2 splicing stitches weren't hidden in the middle, so they were a little bit off-centered. That's not going to be noticeable if you're looking from the front, only if you're looking into the pocket, which is not going to be a big major sticking point for me.
The next morning.
So I was sewing the gussets last night for the final 2 pockets, and I ran into a bit of an unexpected error, and that is the gusset and the pocket isn't aligning. Now this has happened never so far. I have 2 options. One, I can just force it somehow and it will look more ugly than it is, or I just trim off about that much, essentially where the lines are at the moment. I have no idea how this happened because the pattern, the whole pattern for the back is used from the template of these ones. These 2 should be exactly the same. Maybe not exactly the same, but they should be the same. Which means then this should be the same as well. But now I've got to unpick this, cut a line, and then redo that chamfer, punch the holes again. Hopefully this shouldn't be too bad, but we'll never know. So I didn't want to do this last night because when you're tired you make mistakes that you don't want to, and then that's going to be more costly. I don't have enough leather to redo all of this again. So I'm doing this after a night's rest. So I have unstitched the bits that I need, I think, because this is one before the corner turning, and if you look on this side, if we fold this, then that's going to align with where it wants to go, and that is aligning with here. So I think that hole is going to be the corner hole, so we're going to cut off one past the original stitching holes and then do a new line there. What's the best way to do this? I don't know. Help me. I just hope I don't have to do this again for the next one. This is terrifying. Help me. One, two, and then the rest should go there. Right, let's hope that worked. So after that fiasco, we did manage to finish stitching the pockets. We move on to the left side of the apron, which is the right side for our viewers. I just added in 2 strips of the brown leather so that they act as essentially like holders for the different brushes and combs that it might use and won't fit in the other pockets. Now that I have found the walking foot, I was also a bit braver now as well, so I also hemmed the rest of the apron as well. I then hammered in some buttons to connect the top flap and the pockets. They were a little bit stiff and meant for thicker leather, but it works. Now that the main body of the apron is done, we need to think about how we're going to allow the user to actually wear the apron. Otherwise, it is just a piece of cloth with lots of pockets. That is not very useful. So initially I was going for like a belt design where you have 2 ends of the belt attached to the apron, and then you have a buckle and a loop to hold the pieces, which is what I started doing here. As nice as that sounds, unfortunately it seems that I have lost the capability thin leather. And as I do not have a strap thinner where I can just pull it through, I have to use my skiving knife to try and skive off the thickness, which didn't really work. And after a couple of failed attempts, I had to look in my tool chest and start experimenting, and then realized that I don't actually need for it to buckle. I can just use what is on normally a strap to adjust the length and use that to connect the two pieces, because there is just enough friction from the two fake leather pieces. Unfortunately, I seem to have lost the footage of me deciding to do that and the finishing touches of that, so you have to have a look at the final review of that. And speaking of final touches, it seems to have lost most of the footage of that, but mostly it was just consisting of doing a bit of a cutout for the nail clippers so that there is space for longer handles, using flame to cut up the thread ends, using glue to do the sewing up edges, also have to redo the foam pocket again because they did it inside out again, using wax to cover the entire thing. That is probably it, so let's have a look at the final results. So here is me doing a little bit of a demo. That's the length adjuster I was talking about earlier. Can just kind of slip one end of the belt onto it and then just swivel the entire thing across. And everything that was needed to be in the apron fits. So that's a win on that count. There's a couple of things I can probably be better working on. One of being the workmanship, obviously, but also the design of the gussets as well, making sure that I have enough leather before I start a project is also going to be very useful. And maybe I need to work on a bit of my leather skiving skills as well. That seems to be one of the kind of prohibitive factor, but also I don't have the right thickness of leather as well, just based on the limited budget. So you kind of have to get by with what you have, and that's the entire thing. But happy to report that the person who got the gift was very happy about it. So yeah, that was not a bad gift. I think it took the entire week of my vacation that I took off for Christmas, but it works, and my workmanship has gone up a level since the last time I did something like this, and this is the first time I've designed a big-ish piece. So yeah, and with that, I know it's a bit late into the new year, but it is still January and Chinese New Year hasn't happened yet, so hope you guys have a good 2025. And I'll see you on the next video of Makers of Four, Master of None. Bye!